Members, Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Blumenfield, and Mr. De Leon.
We don't have a quorum on your side. So.
And we're also waiting for Senator Leno. So we'll get started on the discussion, although we need to have a quorum present in order to take any actions. So we are waiting for those four gentlemen. If the sergeants could round them up, I would greatly appreciate it. All right. Mr. Leno is here. All right. So the Senate is relatively prompt. It's on the Assembly side we're having the challenge. So what else is new, right? No comment. We're going to start today with the elimination of general fund funding for the California Poison Control System. Did the LAO have a comment you would like to start us off with?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Lisa Morawski, Legislative Analyst's Office. We believe the poison control system is an essential service for the state of California, and we do support the pursuit of alternative funding sources for the poison control system. But we believe that until an alternative funding source is identified, we recommend against eliminating state support.
Mr. Cheney?
But there are a variety of potential funding sources here. First Five, foundations, the Health Care Foundation, the CEOs, I mean, all of those groups, the endowment. How much money is in this program that's federal and already from other? In other words, how much money would be left in the program if this $5.9 million goes away? Finance?
They receive about another $2.3 million in federal funds.
That's all? Don't they have other donations and matches and?
Madam Chair, John Ward, Law Department of Finance. Yes, they do receive additional dollars. Although they fluctuate by year, they're expecting approximately $100,000 in 9/10. Yes.
Mr. Leno?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the LAO, they also have the opportunity to access some of the enhanced federal dollars?
Under ARA? No, not that we're aware of.
No, not at all.
No.
I'm sorry, SCHIP.
Under SCHIP, yeah. And actually, we do recommend that the legislature direct EMSA and Mr. Mibb to work together to pursue SCHIP funding. But that would be contingent on receiving general fund to pull down a match. And it could also, our understanding is, it could also be only a portion of SCHIP funding, or a portion of the general fund could be matched with Title 21 dollars. And this relates to the proportion of the poison control system callers served that meet certain criteria for SCHIP funding.
And in terms of matching county fund, in terms of matching SCHIP funds, there are other fund sources other than general fund that can be used to draw down those federal SCHIP funds. So, for example, to the extent that First Five committed some dollars for the 0 to 5 eligible population, or counties committed some dollars, or there are other funds that if they're general fund type funds, they could be used to draw down the SCHIP funds. So it's not exclusively a state general fund match for those funds.
Okay. I think we all recognize the very important work that poison control does and impacts many lives very directly on a daily basis. But given our situation, we're trying to figure out, are there other ways to get to that figure? Is it accurate? I don't know in detail the history of the program, but counties used to fund this until about 10 years ago?
We started this general fund contribution generally in 96, 97, and I believe we started at around $1 million in terms of the overall contribution, and we've increased it during the years, and then it received some reductions last year as part of the 10% reductions. So this is a relatively new general fund obligation relative to other ones. It's been about 10, 12 years.
Well,
Thank you.
No,
Mr. Dutton and Mr. Cheney.
Yeah, Madam Chair, when it's appropriate, I'd go ahead and move the governor's recommendation on the 5.9 with the understanding that they are going to actively and aggressively pursue these other alternatives that various members have discussed. So.
Mr. Cheney.
Well, just one question. If it was only $1 million to start with, what are they doing now that they didn't do then? It's always been 24 hours. Why is it $6 million now if it was $1 million when it started?
It's CMAQ now, right? Yeah. They used to receive some funds also from the CMAQ Commission, and then over time, the CMAQ contribution has gone down, the general fund contribution has gone up, and our general fund support program, for the support for the program has increased.
So the information I have says that for every dollar we spend on poison control, we save at least $7 in other healthcare costs. And this is one of those areas where I'm concerned about cost shifting. And it seems to me that if poison control is not open and can't take phone calls, they're going to go to 911. We're going to have much more extensive emergency response. I know Mr. Dutton has a motion that he wishes to make, and I wouldn't mind supporting the motion if I felt some level of comfort there was some other source of funding that was sustainable and adequate, but I haven't heard any testimony that there is. I've heard there could be, we're applying for, we're looking into, but my recommendation at this point, and I'm not saying you can't make your motion, Mr. Dutton, but my recommendation right now would be to hold it over until we can find out whether or not there are any other sustainable, adequate sources of funding.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go ahead and make the motion because we got a lot of things we're going to be looking at, and we also got a very short fuse. And while I do agree that this is a critical, it's one of those critical programs. We got a lot of critical programs, and it's not that this one here is being totally wiped out. There is federal dollars that are not conditioned on this, and I think there is a strong opportunity here that we can find additional dollars from other sources. So I'd like to go forward with my motion that we accept the governor's recommendation.
Okay, do we have a second? And then I'll move to Mr. Leno.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second, Mr. Leno.
Thank you. I think we're going to find that there's an argument to be made that every dollar we cut is penny wise and pound foolish. But out of concern that the chair has stated, can you give us a timeline of how this would impact? We don't want the lights to go out. So how much lead time would they have? How much funding do they have to carry them through to whatever date they would need to have secured new funding so the lights don't go out?
If the general fund is cut, they say the doors will close effective September 1st, 2009.
What will they do with the federal money?
Madam Chair, the federal dollars would still be available and would be used. I believe they would leverage those dollars and keep them going through around the September timeframe.
And do we think that September timeframe is accurate?
As far as I know.
It's the best information we have at this point, yes.
Mr. Lowenthal.
Could you tell me if, in fact, 10, 11 years ago, the primary source of funding was CMAQ, and that we had $1 million and they had put in more money? Are they not able, and where's their source of funds? Are they not able to contribute more now?
I can tell you that in 2002 and 2003 was the last year in which we received CMAQ dollars. I can't tell you the specific reason as to why those funds dried up.
If you could just quickly share with me, I'm not educated on it. Where does CMAQ get their resources?
The CMAQ generally, CMAQ is the entity that contracts for our hospital rates
Right.
for the Medi-Cal program. I think they took some of the funds that they have available through the contracting program, but we can look at what the CMAQ history was and get back to you on that.
I believe they were able to leverage federal funds through the Disproportionate Share Hospital program, and a federal audit went through and found that that was not an appropriate use of the funds.
I would like us to find any way we can, but I concur with Senator Leno and that it is time to begin to look at how we're going to reduce our funding.
All right, so we have a motion at this point. My recommendation is going to be to hold the item open at this point, but we can take a vote. Senate? 5-0. Assembly? I have 3 votes for open.
Right.
You're voting on Mr. Dutton's?
Came out 5-0 in the Senate.
Okay, so I have 2 ayes and 3 noes on the Assembly side. So that stays open. But it stays open only because I want to know if there is some other sustainable source of funding that we can find before September.
Madam Chair, if I may, I would like to ask if analysts could take a look at HMO foundations or statewide consortiums that may already exist.
Whatever we can find.
Kaiser Foundation, somebody call Bob Ross.
Absolutely.
I believe the issue is that there's no committed funding at this point, and Poison Control has been directed to pursue alternative sources of funding, but they were not able to, in the last fiscal year, find committed sources of funding.
Well, at this point, there's only 3 votes standing between them and no general fund funding. So I would suggest we need to move this quickly, because it's going to come back around to us next week.
Yeah, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm just curious a little bit right now, because this is a $6 million. I appreciate this is important, but everything we're looking at is important. Is that your intent, is that the Assembly's intent, that you aren't going to be looking at making any reductions, no matter how, I mean, these are painful for us, too.
No, I understand, but when I'm
We've got
looking
a
at...
cash crisis coming up here, and pretty soon there's going to be people not being able to, I mean, we've already gone off the cliff. Now, how hard we're going to land is up to us right now in this room. We better be making some firm decisions here, because so far, based on what's the action taken last week and now this one, I'm getting the feeling, are we really going to make any reductions, no matter how painful they are?
Mr. Dutton, we are painfully aware of the date that we are coming up against. We're also aware that every single one of these reductions is painful. I'm also aware that for every dollar we spend on this, we spend $7 elsewhere. It's not a matter of saving money. It's actually a matter of spending more money elsewhere. So some of these cuts are penny wise and pound foolish, no matter how you look at them, and this happens to be one of them.
If we had been more aggressive in this legislature of trying to promote jobs in the private sector instead of regulating them out of California, you wouldn't be having this problem.
We can talk about a whole lot of what ifs.
But you can't have it both ways. You can't provide a high level of service for the people of California. I appreciate what you're coming from. I agree with you there. Okay, I don't like doing this either. But Hastings College was, as an example, was not one of those, okay, where it's going to cost you anything else. Okay, and yet we couldn't even make a cut there. So that's the reason I'm concerned.
Now, your concern has been noted. Let's move on, members, to page 2 is a summary page. Pages 3 through 13 are vote-only items. Yes, Mr. Nielsen.
As to those pages 2 through 13, Madam Chair, I'd like to request the proposal to related to the small and rural hospitals on page 7, that be moved to a discussion item. There's pending litigation in this matter. Assemblyman Chesbrough and I have been working on this. He has some legislation that is important to both of us. This is the elimination of the exemption is a new proposal, and I'd like to ask LAO and Finance to do some examination of that, the history of the exemption, pending litigation. I understand there is maybe a court stay.
Well, before we get into discussion on the item, let's just first go through the list and see if there's any other items to be removed for discussion. Okay, so we will remove item number 7 for discussion. Let's move the pages 3 through 6 and pages 8 through 13 first, and then we'll go back to page 7. Do I have a motion?
We're no on 12.
All right, so we will vote separately on 12. Any others we need to vote separately on? All right, so the motion is to move for approval items 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 13. Can we do that on a 5-0-5-0? Yeah. Seeing no objection. Then we will vote separately on item number 12. Right. Is 3-2-3-2?
Wait, I want to hear. Well, I'd like to hear the questions. Why don't we just do the same and move it
All
to
right,
discussion?
we'll move 7 and 12 for discussion. So let's go back to, yes.
Sorry, you were going awfully quickly there. We were trying to look at our
I
notes
know.
on page 10. Senator Dutton, we're off on that one. Right. We're off on page 10.
Okay, so we'll take item number 10 for separate vote as well. All right. So 7, 10, and 12 have been removed for discussion.
Okay.
So we've moved 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 13. All right, so let's go back then to item number 7, Mr. Nielsen.
This is an issue related to the small rural hospitals and an exemption. We're not arguing about the Assembly Budget Subcommittee action, but that the elimination of the exemption is a new proposal. We'd like to see that examined in some greater depth. It does have, I think, I would argue, a disproportionate impact on rural areas, and there's pending litigation, I understand. I'd like to know a little bit more about that litigation, and why are there some difficulties in LAO's view of dealing with small rural hospitals. I think Assemblyman Chesbrough and I would have our own opinions, but we'd like your more learned point of view on that, and a little more background about the exemption.
Somebody explain it. Yes,
All right, so more information is needed on that.
Ask finance.
Finance?
The rate reduction to non-contract hospitals was in effect as part of the special session reductions to hospital rates and to Medi-Cal rates that were done in the 7-8 in the special session in the spring of last year. Then as part of the final budget package, that rate, the small and rural hospitals were exempted from that reduction. So it was in effect for several months last year, and then was undone by and they were exempted in the final budget agreement last year. We think in the context of limited general fund resources, this is a reduction that is an option. And in the context of the limited general fund resources, it's a reduction that we would support.
Mr. Cheney, then Ms. Walters.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand. I wasn't aware of any litigation. I mean, I understand the history of it.
I think there's been litigation more broadly on the rates issue. This particular one has not been part of the rate reductions that have been enjoined by the court, is my understanding.
There is a stay, though. Is that correct?
The stay in the Medi-Cal rate litigation applies to other provider categories, not necessarily the non-contract hospital category. The non-contract hospital reduction has went into effect, and then was undone by legislation. Relative to this particular provider group, it remains in effect for the rest of the provider groups.
Okay.
Ms. Walters?
I just wanted some clarification that there was some concern regarding rural hospitals going bankrupt, and that's perhaps why they were part of the exemption. Is that correct? And is this going to be still part of the cuts? I mean, what happens if rural hospitals potentially go bankrupt?
I believe that the legislature made a policy determination that given the challenges of some small and rural hospitals, that it made sense to exempt these hospitals from the broader non-contract. That was a policy determination based on, few hospitals and their overall financial condition. It is an option. It's a rate reduction that was in effect for some times, and it's a general fund option available to you.
Okay.
Yes, if I may.
Mr. Cheney?
Wouldn't the hospitals, if they wanted to be exempt from this, all they got to do is contract, right?
This is a reduction that impacts non-contract hospitals, yes.
It's only non-contract hospitals. This goes to the issue of we were trying to convince people that they wanted to contract. Wasn't that how everybody else got into this rate reduction?
Last year's budget package did include some changes to create additional incentives for hospitals to contract across the state with Medicaid, and to address some of the issues that the Medi-Cal program has been facing relative to less hospitals being interested in contracting with the program. This was part of the rate reductions that were done in the first package, I believe March of last year. The changes to encourage additional hospitals to contract with the Medi-Cal program was done as part of the budget package that also provided this exemption.
In September. That was the September budget.
Correct.
But now we're in much worse condition than we were then. I mean, and
Well,
I don't know.
in this particular respect, though, this is the only game in town. In terms of contracting and competition, there's not a lot of bidders for serving this very minuscule population. And in some cases, this is absolutely the only game in town. If they're bankrupt, and there's not going to be competition, nobody wants the business. And in fact, our first and only responder in a lot of the rural counties is the emergency services, the CDF or fire or police. That's the only care they get.
Mr. Nilo?
Is this a Department of Finance proposal?
This is not a Department of Finance proposal. This was not a proposal that we included in the May revision.
Where did it come from?
From us, right? I think it came from Senate Democrats.
That's what concerned me about this. If it came from finance, that could be something else.
Finance said they support it, though.
But the reason I say that is, first of all, rural hospitals are different. And the fact that they don't contract has to do with the unique circumstances there. There aren't very many of them. And I believe the fact of the matter is that if this were adopted, we would see serious challenges to the viability of hospitals in those areas. This was part of a previous budget deal. It was admittedly a Republican ask because the rural areas are largely represented by Republicans. So even though I don't represent them, I understand it. And we have a unique understanding of the plight under which they operate because of the fact that they're largely represented by Republicans. So it was a Republican ask as part of the collaborative budget process to come back in a subsequent budget process and somehow not anymore recognize the unique aspect of it and change the deal such a short time afterwards seems to me to somehow compromise the spirit of collaboration that we have to operate under with regard to addressing budget issues. I understand we have a severe deficit and we have to plug it, and if that were the only circumstance, I would support this. But the problem is we will likely see, at the very least, serious compromises to the financial viability of hospitals in rural areas and potentially bankruptcies. And that doesn't solve our problem.
Ms. Walters, and then Mr. Cheney.
You know, I understand we all have to make a lot of sacrifices and a lot of cuts. And from our side, this is something we're going to support. It's not our first choice of a cut. I mean, it's a very difficult one for us. And so I just thought it was important to make the comment that we're all having to make sacrifices, and this is a tough one for us, but we're willing to make the cut.
Mr. Cheney, then Mr. Blumenfield.
Just trying to, I mean, I understand Senator Assemblyman Neela's point. I mean, I don't know that it was a deal so much as it was the original administration proposal. We agreed to a modified version of it that did exempt them, but that was then and this is now. I mean, that could be true of everything else in this budget that was done in September. I mean, everything we thought we were protecting in September and February is now on the table, and the governor's proposing to eliminate all those programs. So I don't know that any of us are in better shape. I mean, I don't know that any of these particular hospitals break down, and maybe there's a different way to look at financial viability, but just exempting sort of blanket by size and location. I mean, Senator Lowenthal and I both have hospitals in these districts, so on the list of those who would be affected by this. It's not a totally Republican issue, although much of those areas are represented by Republicans, but certainly, if Ms. Walters and others can go with it, I mean, we can too. It's just, we're just looking for money.
Madam Chair, just a last point.
Well, I actually have Mr. Blumenfield, Mr. Lowenthal, Mr. De Leon, and then it'll be Mr. Nielsen.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay. My point isn't so much directly to this item, but with respect to Mr. Nilo, is something to the concept of not going back and revisiting the previous budget deal. I mean, I think that I don't feel bound by the previous budget deal. I mean, the previous budget deal had revenues as well as cuts. And, I mean, when I voted for that, that was part of what I accepted as the deal. The deal was that it was going to be a shared sacrifice, and it wasn't as much of a targeted sacrifice. So when I look at this budget, if we were to go back to the tenets of the previous deal and it were more of, you know, and some of the tenets that I liked about the previous deal more than this one, then I might be willing to sort of say what was left off the table is left off the table. But I think we're in a brave new world here, and we need to take a hard look at everything.
Mr. Lowenthal, then Mr. De Leon, and then Mr. Nielsen.
Well, I'm glad this is a nonpartisan deal because I do have a 10-bed hospital on Catalina Island that is going to be devastated by losing this exemption because it's already barely making it, and the exemption was really very helpful to its existence. And so I'm just torn. I'm willing to make cuts, but I'm definitely torn about this issue.
Mr. De Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not really so much bound to what was negotiated last year, because if I recall, this negotiation, whether it was collaborative or not, I felt like we were held hostage last year by a couple members on the Senate side, how we secured this deal. But that being said, I want to underscore what Mr. Dutton said earlier, which is the whole issue about when are we going to start making the real cuts, without a doubt. But I think we want to make intelligent, smart cuts. And I know that this is not a Republic issue per se. It's a bipartisan issue with regards to folks who live in the rural areas. Question to DOF or LAO or whoever's best qualified to answer this statement. If, in fact, this exemption is taken away from these rural hospitals, what will happen? Not sort of we kind of believe or we're going to extrapolate X, Y, and Z from X, Y, and Z study. What will happen to these rural hospitals if this exemption is lifted? Everyone's looking at each other.
Well, I think what we can tell you is this reduction was in effect for a period of months last year, and we can tell you that some of these hospitals are in a really challenging financial situation. What exactly will happen will depend on a case-by-case situation, on decisions made by the administrators in those hospitals, on their determinations relative to contracting with the Medi-Cal program. It's hard to say what will happen based on the fact that we don't run the facilities in question.
Let me ask you this question, and let me better state it. I'm not from a rural area. I don't live in a rural area. I don't often go into rural areas. So, that being said, I will visit sometime soon. I'm going to go up north. That being said, if a hospital falls into bankruptcy, and that being geographically, mileage-wise, it's very difficult for folks to get to a hospital. Will that force folks who live in the rural areas to go much farther out to get emergency treatment, care, what have you, et cetera?
Again, it's one of those things that will depend on the region. So, for example, if it's one of the hospitals in the areas where there's not other hospitals in close proximity, it'll be different than if it's a small hospital in an area where there may be other hospitals closer. So it will depend based on a case-by-case situation for each particular hospital. If it leads to closures in some areas, it may require additional travel time. It just will depend on a case-by-case situation.
Madam Chair, if I can just add this last final point. Whatever decision is made by the conference committee together is what we'll make together collectively. And I think that part of the theme, at least, my own personal thinking, is when we make cuts, and be very clear, there will be cuts, and there'll be very serious, painful cuts ensuing in the next week or so. But we make these cuts that are least injurious to the most vulnerable, and that means making intelligent, smart cuts too. That being whatever federal matches we have, if there's going to be a calamity in the case if we close down a hospital, what does that mean exactly, and what are the financial ramifications to the state of California? So I would just add, Madam Chair, and obviously I'll take your lead, is if we want to keep this issue open, we can keep this issue open and talk about it later today, but I will go with what you want.
Thanks, Mr. De Leon. This is one of those very difficult cuts that I'm willing to entertain today, but we still have Mr. Nielsen and Mr. Nilo.
Just would observe in terms of working together. It's a very arduous process for all of us, and I don't see an awful lot of partisanship creeping into it. I would hope that it would not. The other day, voting on Hastings, I would have soon gone along with the cut, but I took a 10% and voted for that in the spirit of working with. We all have different things that are maybe really important to us, and my observation that we ought to work together wherever we can, whenever we can. There are going to be plenty of others that we cannot. Wherever we can, we should do our very best to do that. That's my point.
Well, I'm willing to take the consensus of the committee. Personally, I'm ready to move this.
I think we have enough.
If both houses want to hold it open, I'm okay with doing that as well.
You want to move it? Mimi
Okay,
moves
so the
it.
Senate is interested in moving it. Do you want to make a motion?
She did.
Okay,
Mimi
it's
moved
been
it.
motioned.
But,
Mr. Nielsen, I'm fine with keeping it open, although personally I accept it, but it's been moved and seconded, so I think we should vote on it.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Neal, I'm sorry, you were the last person in line.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. My plea was not founded only on the spirit of collaboration argument because circumstances are different and we have to view them as being different. But the circumstance of the plight of rural hospitals is not different. And I'm not going to say that there aren't areas where if one hospital ceased to exist, there wasn't another one within a reasonable drive. But by and large, that's not the case in many of these rural areas, particularly in the eastern and northern parts of our state. And if we were to cause the bankruptcy of hospitals like this, it would work counter. It would work counter to budget solutions. I'm not trying to avoid a cut here. It would work counter to the solutions. And I was with Mr. Nielsen on the Hastings issue. I would have been willing to support that cut in its entirety, but a 10% to look for the rest was reasonable because it's not a huge amount of money. It was different with Cal grants because that was a much more significant amount of money, and where were we going to get the rest of it? This is an item similar in size to the Hastings Law School action, and at the very least to keep this open to see if there are other places. I can see that Mr. Nielsen and I appear to be isolated on this, so but there could potentially, I guess there's three of us that have these concerns, but if we kept it open, perhaps along with the other 9 million someplace else we're looking to avoid the Hastings situation, we could find another 10 to perhaps avoid this one.
Good comments, and I would point out in my area in Northern California, if Mr. Chesborough's 3 rural hospitals close and the one in Ukiah, people are going to drive 1, 2, 3 hours down 101 to Santa Rosa to the only hospital remaining open. So this is a bipartisan issue, and the concerns that I had on the previous issue of poison control where we're shifting the costs, I think the same concern is applicable here. What I'm hearing as a consensus is that we will leave this open as a courtesy, at least for the first round, for more discussion, more information. So unless there's an objection, all right.
But if we're going to do that, I mean, the one thing is, I think we need better, we've done this as a group classification. I am not quite convinced that a 10% reduction in only the Medi-Cal share of their business for these hospitals is going to send them over the cliff. And they were exempted as a group, not based on income, not based on Medi-Cal share, not based on anything else. So if somebody wants to sort through there and say which of these hospitals get more than 50% of their funding from Medi-Cal patients, or I mean, this is only a 10% reduction in fee-for-service. These are non-contract hospitals, which means they're already at the highest possible Medi-Cal rate, and this is only a 10% reduction. So much as I'm sympathetic to some of them being very small and that any little matter, I mean, and one of them's in my district too, so, and I know what their condition is, but some of it's self-inflicted. So, part of, if we're going to analyze it, knowing that most of us are ready to go there, it's fair, but there may have to be a different sort than just sort of this generic small and rural. And I'm not quite convinced that 10% cuts in this are going to actually be that devastating to them. I mean, this isn't, and depending on how some of the other, I'm willing to leave it open because I think how some of the other cuts affect them too, and we just kind of need to look at it as a picture. That part's fair.
All right, so we're leaving item number 7
Chair,
open, and
there is a motion on the. You probably should.
I'm sorry.
Act on the motion.
Do we have a withdrawal of the motion, or? Yeah.
Here's what my concern is if we continue to do this and we continue to put things over and leave them open, and then we're going to revisit them again, are we going to go through the same discussion? I mean, are we going to make decisions? I mean, what's the process? We're leaving a lot of items open. So what happens? We come back.
Yeah, we come back for another round, and we have to make some final decisions.
Well, I guess my question is there going to be new information that's going to come in between now and next time?
Sounds like the Assembly Republicans want a little bit more analysis, as well as Mr. Cheney, as far as the impacts on all of the small and rural hospitals.
Okay.
They may not be the same.
Okay, I will withdraw my motion for this, but I really urge this committee to move forward. We have a lot of work to do, and a lot of tough decisions have to be made. So, saying that, I will go ahead and I will withdraw my motion for this one.
We'll come back to it.
All right, Mr. Dutton, is the motion withdrawn? The second's withdrawn? Okay, thank you. So we will come back to this one. Item number 10, you asked for a separate vote. Do we need discussion on item number 10?
We're just off of it. We just
All
don't
right.
want to be recorded as supporting.
So
That
that's
was the only
3-2
reason.
on the Senate side,
Just off.
You're just absent, okay.
3-4, and 2 not voting on the Senate side.
So we're 3-0 on the Senate side.
And what about the Assembly side? 3 ayes, 4 ayes, 5 ayes. All right. Then item number 12,
Page 10.
yeah, that's page 10. Item number 12, you asked to have that one removed for discussion. This is actually one that I'm willing to reject, members, even as a lawyer.
We're just voting no on our side.
Yeah, let's have some discussion, because I'm open to, yeah. We're open to being convinced.
We are wide open to being convinced on this one.
We pulled it without discussion, actually. But
Well, let's discuss.
we just wanted to have a different vote on it. But we just believe that it's an additional cost, and that we should be able to find other areas to offset this cost.
Why do you think we need $6 million more for litigation? Can't we figure out how to prevent the litigation rather than spending the $6 million? Yeah, that's attorneys, and we'd solve the whole problem.
We've seen an increase in our workload. We've seen an increase in the litigation. Department's facing a variety of reductions, unallocated reductions to achieve different savings included in last year's budget, in addition to 10% reductions in last year's budget. It's a workload increase that needs to be handled, and that's the rationale for our proposal.
But is it in-house lawyers, or it's contract services to the AG, or it's contracted out $500 an hour attorneys? I mean, who is this?
It's generally AG costs. Department of Justice costs.
Farrah Brock with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We too have concerns, and we raised questions with the department, and they haven't provided any sort of backup or justification. Some of the costs were also related to storage, and I couldn't get any information on what the storage was for either. So,
Mr. Blumenfield. All right, well, the chair would be willing to entertain a motion to reject this one. Mr. Lowenthal has moved.
Move it. You guys move it. It's not cost-effective way? We'll lose what?
Madam Chair.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to reject item number 12, page 12, item number 4260. Can we record, without objection, a 5-0 vote on both sides? All right.
And Madam Chair, we note that there's a relationship between how much we spend on this litigation and the far more costly side of it, which is compliance with adverse rulings.
I understand.
Say, huh?
So noted.
Wait, do that again?
If we lose the court cases, there's generally far greater costs associated with compliance on that side of the equation than there is in the litigation costs associated with defending the litigation that we're facing an increase.
Yeah, the only question is, what are we doing to avoid the litigation in the first place? In the Corrections Department, we are designing an entire litigation prevention unit that we're funding. Why can't we figure out how to do that here, too?
All right, the action's been taken on that item. We can move on to item number 14, Medi-Cal program local assistance, unspecified budget reductions. I would appreciate a comment from the LAO and the Department of Finance on this item as to where the savings really come from.
14?
Page 14.
Here from LAO.
Unspecified budget reductions to the Medi-Cal program local assistance. And I've asked both the LAO and the Department of Finance to comment on where we really find these savings, because they're unspecified at this point.
thank you, Madam Chair. We share your concerns about where the savings are coming from, and that's why our recommendation is that the money be added back to the budget, unfortunately, because we don't have any specific actions that are tied with achieving these reductions. For the 2008-9 budget, there was a similar reduction proposed, and those were not able to be achieved as well in that year. So we think it's unlikely they'll be achieved in 9-10.
Department of Finance.
Madam Chair, this was a policy change that was first enacted in the 7-8 budget, in the budget in which the reduction was achieved. And basically, the Medi-Cal budget is a large budget with a lot of different policy changes associated with federal law, state law, and different things that are happening at different points in time. And basically, what this does is it looks at what has been the difference between the level of appropriation and budgeted expenditures and actual expenditures for a 5-year period, and we calculate an average. And it's essentially capturing that balance of the estimate associated with so many different moving parts. It's based on what our experience has been in the last 5 years. We achieved it in 7-8. We've had savings much greater than this level. Law of averages, some years we don't hit it, and we recognize that right now for 8-9 we are not anticipating that we would achieve these savings. We think, based on our history, based on our trends, it's fair to assume that we can achieve these savings in 9-10.
All right, discussion from members. The recommendation is to accept this, to approve it.
Do you support the governor's reduction? Okay, I'll move that.
All right, it's been moved. Seconded. Without objection, then, we'll record a 5-0 vote on item number 4260, page 14. We can move on to page 15. This is the governor's federal Medi-Cal flexibility and stabilization. I would like, again, LAO and Department of Finance to comment on this, because this is requiring, or the governor is petitioning to the federal government for flexibilities, and I want to know how realistic is this, and what would be the timeline as far as whether or not we could actually score the savings, and what kind of flexibility.
Madam Chair, we're in a similar place on this proposal. We believe these savings are speculative and unlikely to be achieved in 2009-10. The May revision provides very limited information on how these proposed savings would be achieved, and we're concerned that it would be unlikely that the Obama administration or Congress would grant the state the flexibility it's seeking. In part, this is because any flexibility they would grant the state on their Medicaid program could have implications nationwide. I mean, other states would be seeking similar flexibility that would, again, cost the federal government more money potentially. We also think that even if they could get the flexibility from the federal government, that the ability to achieve the full amount of the proposed savings is unlikely in the budget year 9-10. This is because generally it takes at least 3 months to implement some of these proposals, and there could also be information systems technology changes. Rarely is the department able to implement things as quickly as they anticipate they will be able to, and because of that we think some of the savings would be lost if they could even get the flexibility they were seeking in the first place.
Do you have any idea about what is feasible, or is this just
we really haven't seen enough
details
details to even know what they're considering? I mean, I would imagine that it may be some of the things they proposed in the past, but we don't know.
Okay, then let's go to the Department of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The underlying premise for this proposal is first the underlying rate of growth in the Medi-Cal program and the extent to which the rate of growth in the program is one that is achievable, and we believe it is necessary is sustainable over time. And we believe it's necessary to work with the federal government on a variety of strategies to achieve these savings in the near future, but also to look at reforms and changes to the Medi-Cal program going forward that address the rate of growth in the program in a manner that makes it sustainable, given the fact that in a couple of years we're going to be losing the benefit of the enhanced federal Medicaid funds that we're benefiting from, and that are in effect protecting this program in the budget year. There's different types of categories and things that we are working with the federal government currently on. Our conversations with the federal government started at the same time as the May revision was released, and a little bit before then, and we're continuing to have regular discussions with the feds about different types of things. One is issues where the federal government, where there's been long-term disputes and where the federal government has the authority to be able to provide additional federal funds to the state associated with costs that we believe are not being fully compensated by the federal government. One of those areas is the clawback area, which is referenced in your agenda, where we believe that California should be receiving additional federal funds that would, in effect, reduce our general fund costs. Other areas are payments having to do with disability determinations for people that should be in Medicare and in SSI that are being currently paid for in the Medi-Cal side of the equation. And those have been issues that have been under discussions with Congress and with the federal government with some time. Both of those are things that would generate additional federal funds that would result in general fund savings of hundreds of millions of dollars. Clawback would be ongoing. Some of the other things would be one time. There's areas and changes associated with rebates. There's places where the federal government could, for example, expedite approval of rate reduction state plan amendments that we believe would be helpful relative to the rate reductions that were enacted by the legislature and enjoined by the court last year. There are areas where we think we could have additional flexibility, where we can do things to better coordinate care for seniors and persons with disabilities that would, in effect, provide us an opportunity to access $360 million in federal funds in the old hospital financing waiver. So there are a variety of different strategies, both having to do with cost containment reforms going forward, as well as with accessing the appropriate level of federal funds that we think make this achievable.
I appreciate the strategy, and I understand the fact that we've got some long-standing disputes with the federal government over these issues. The real question that I have, though, is we know that we have to take this stuff to the bank by July 1. And that's my bottom line question here. You know, I'm hoping that you're right. We will resolve some of these disputes sometime. You know, but what you said was in the near future, and I don't have any level of comfort, and I'm not really hearing any, that we can literally take this to the bank on July 1.
We are working with the federal government. We're having discussions with the federal HHS. They understand our timelines, and we're continuing to pursue the different options. Can I tell you exactly what day those dollars will be coming to our state? I think we're having discussions, and they're interested in working with California, and we believe that these savings are achievable.
Mr. Cheney.
Well, here's the problem, and I suspect we have to leave this open at least until we get a better handle on it, but it seems to me there is a division between those things we think they owe us money for, like the disability claim, because all the states, I think part of their hesitation on that claim is that total it comes out to almost $4 billion for all the other states, because everybody's got the same fight going on. So we ought to all pursue that, and all the states ought to be pursuing that, and we ought to get them to pay up if they owe us money. And the clawback has always been a big fight, because the way they did that, the Medi-Cal Part D, cost us money. They should pay back. So I would divide off, if you could, for the next round of this, the things that we think are bills, essentially, that I think the federal government owes us money. And those two together, is $700-800 million, right? I don't know how much the clawback is. I know the other one is like $700 million. The disability, at least our claim of what we think they owe us. So, and then some sense of progress. I think Chairwoman's right. Some sense of confidence that this is something that is achievable in the budget year is a different question. Certainly we understand its estimates. Certainly we understand, that it might not be resolved completely, but we need some level of direction. And I think what's been hard with this particular piece, the way it was laid out earlier, is we don't all have, as the LAO said, a sense for what all things finance seems to be entered. The administration has entered into discussions. So it would be helpful for us to have a list of which things you think you're asking for flexibilities in and what those might save outside of the billing one. Because the billing one's the big one. And if there's any hope at all and any possibility that they're going to decide everybody gets paid back here, that would be good. And then we could count on $700 or $800 million of this billion. And and the other, I think there's some concern that you're treading on some difficult policy ground. The flexibilities question is a different one. If you're asking for flexibilities to reduce rates and you're asking for flexibilities to exclude populations or flexibilities to change eligibility, I think some of us would have a lot more concern than if you're asking for flexibility to spend our dollars more wisely, which I've thought we needed for a long time from them in terms of spending preventative dollars versus hospitalization dollars. At least I've heard over the years a lot of frustration that we seem to have a perverse incentive built into the way Medi-Cal works, that we pay better if you go to the hospital than we do if you go to the clinic and don't go to the hospital. And we ought to pay better for you staying out of the hospital and doing outpatient services, and we don't pay hospitals enough for outpatient services, we pay them for inpatient. So if it was flexibility in that vein, that's different than if you're asking for flexibility from eligibility, rate reductions, which are already the lowest in the country, I would add. We're still 51st out of 50 states, aren't we? Last time I looked, in Medi-Cal spending per capita. Yeah, because D.C. is separate. And D.C. spends more money per capita on Medi-Cal than we do. Literally. So because of our managed care system and because we went there early, and somehow it would be nice if they would recognize we have spent our dollars wisely and you ought to give us a little more room to do what we do well. But that's a different flexibility than the ones we've heard. And because this proposal's been so vague, it's been hard for people to sort through what it is we're trying to save for. If it's, and so I would separate the billing from the flexibilities.
Just one quick
Mr.
question.
Dutton?
Yeah, from Department of Finance, do you think it's going to be any clearer 2 weeks from now than it is right now, as far as what the probability is?
I think we can provide you some additional information in terms of the issues under discussion. Do I think we're going to have a final determination within 2 weeks? I think these discussions probably take longer than that time period.
I do too. You know, Madam Chair, under those circumstances, I'd go ahead and support the governor's, reduction, but I won't make it in the form of a motion if you want to carry it over. But it doesn't sound to me like it's going to be any clearer than it is today. So.
Well, that's part of the problem, though. I mean, it's $1 billion we're talking about, and if it's not clear, and we're trying to race against the clock so that we can go to the bank on July 1, I don't see that helps us. And I'd rather address that problem than ignore it. So my preference would be to hold it open for the first round and hope that you can come back to us next week with something more specific. Yeah, let's see where we are next week, what we know.
One other question.
Mr. Dunn.
Let's say we do get an answer, because you're going to pursue this anyway, later on in the year, would it be able to be retroactive?
Generally for the issues having to do with federal funds and the compensation of and for example for things like clawback, that will likely happen later in the year, and then we can go back and get since it's reimbursement for prior costs, that would be something that would be of benefit for things that happened before that point in time. To the extent that we're looking at issues having to do with cost containment, then the implementation timeline is important on those. But as it relates to the budget year, generally most of the budget year benefit will come from things like resolution of some of these issues having to do with the state being adequately compensated. The reforms are more important relative to our out year and to our changing the slope of growth in the Medi-Cal program. So most of these, Senator, to your point, most of these would be things that would help us for costs that we've already incurred and would be retroactive in nature. They could very well be that way.
Okay.
Keeping pressure on the feds. Plus, the big item is $700 million all by itself. So, if we had even something more on that next week, you might feel some better level of comfort in moving forward. Mr. Lowenthal?
Yeah, I would feel like if really part of our goal is to have the amount of resolution so that we can avert the cash flow problem, I don't think this helps us at all until we have more specifics, because nobody's going to lend us any money because we just picked a number out of the hat and it's not tied to anything. I think we need something more real if we're really going to count it. I don't think it helps us with our cash flow problem, this one, unless we know something. No, later on, yes, but that's why I don't think it's a crucial right now. I agree we should explore it, but it's, to me, it almost feels like the Ed Fund. We score it, but it doesn't mean anything.
It means nothing. And that's the problem. It has to mean something on July 1st. And that was my discomfort that I was trying to articulate. So if there's no objection, we will hold that open. We'll come back to it very early next week, if not before. Page 16. 10% reduction to replacement DSH for private hospitals. I would like the LAO to comment briefly, and then we'll go to the Department of Finance. How much do we lose in federal matching funds on this one? LAO? Excuse me.
Elizabeth Chung, Legislative Analyst Office. I believe that we would lose $24 million general and federal matching funds. We believe that these savings are achievable, and we think that this is an option that the legislature should consider given the state's fiscal condition.
Department of Finance.
Just for clarity on the dollar amount, the figure quoted by the analyst was at the 50-50%. That doesn't take into consideration the FMAC impact. So it'd be a little different from that.
Can you explain that, though?
Yeah, for every, in the Medi-Cal area, for every $1 million of general fund reduction that results, there's a federal impact of $1.6 million.
But this is different, isn't it? Because it's the waiver.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Cheney, then Ms. Walters.
Well, let me just ask this question. I am advised that there may be an alternative fund from which the $23 million could be taken, but I don't know the status of it. Within the hospital waiver universe, there is a distressed hospital fund that I'm told might have sufficient resources in it to sustain the $23 million hit better than using this particular fund. And I don't know. And I'm a little worried that if it is a distressed hospital fund, if $23 million zeroed out, that might not be helpful. But if it, because there might be some need for a distressed hospital fund to still exist. I'm not interested in zeroing that out. But I also, it may make things easier between public-private dish world if that fund could be used. And I don't know if anybody's explored that yet.
We are looking at that alternative. We don't have a final number associated with how much money there is available. We can come back to the committee with that, with our analysis of that option.
All right, quickly.
Ms. Walters, then Mr. De Leon.
Senator Cheney asked my question, so I don't need to ask it.
It's something similar along the lines. So I can understand this. If we cut this funding, then we'll lose dollar for dollar, right, from the feds.
This is part of our hospital financing waiver, and generally we leverage federal funds for the funds that either are general fund or intergovernmental transfer funds.
So we will lose...
Or certified public expenditure funds.
The governor's recommendation is $24 million, and we will lose $24 million from the feds. More. Okay, this is what you were saying. Right. Explain that to me then, please, the methodology.
Just the methodology for purposes of the Medi-Cal estimate, there's a variety of policies that are embedded in the overall program, and for efficiency purposes, and in order to get you a timely estimate for your consideration, a lot of the previously approved policies have been costed out at the historical 50-50 rate, and then there's a separate adjustment, which is the net effect of all the FMAP implications throughout the estimate in one separate change. So these Medi-Cal figures before you are rough figures, and we would cost it out correctly once you make your decisions, taking into consideration the rate that we currently get from the federal government.
So following the line of Ms. Duchesne's questioning, if in fact if we were to move forward with this specific recommendation, those hospitals who have a high Medi-Cal universe who are in the private sector, what other source would they be able to qualify for any resources to deal with that Medi-Cal low-income population?
They continue to receive Medicaid funding, and they continue to receive some disproportionate share hospital funding. Another way of looking at this proposal is that basically in the February budget, you enacted a 10% reduction to public hospitals. This is basically like treatment for disproportionate share
There are two
hospitals.
conversations going on here. Go again?
So in the February budget, you enacted a 10% reduction to public hospitals that are funded through the hospital financing waiver. This essentially is like treatment for the DISH hospitals as the public hospitals receive in that February package. So it's a 10% reduction was done for public hospitals. This is a 10% reduction for disproportionate share hospitals, all of whom continue to receive funding through the hospital financing waiver as well as through the base Medi-Cal program in the case of private hospitals.
All right, thank you.
All right, committee members, the recommendation is to hold this open for the first go-round, and we'll come back to it again a little bit later. As soon as we get the distressed hospitals issue resolved or brought back to us. Page 17, I believe this is a very simply technical item, and I would entertain a motion to approve it, unless there's discussion. Motion and a second. So without Mr. Nielsen, did you have a comment?
Good.
All right, without objection, then we'll record the vote as 5-0, accepting this item on page 17. Moving on to page 18. Discussion, members?
Move it.
All right, we've got a motion to approve. I have a second. Have a second. So without objection, we will record the vote as 5-0. All right, and we can move on to page 19. Same thing. Unless there's discussion, members, I would entertain a motion. Mr. Cheney?
Do we have the trailer bill language yet, so that we know? Yeah? Okay, it's just, should there any issues arise in resolving trailer, this universal caveat, then they might need to be brought back. I understand this is one where the trailer bill still needs to be resolved between everybody, but we'll take the action. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for putting that on the record, actually. I meant to say that where we don't have trailer bill language, it should be assumed or stipulated that trailer bill language will be coming back, and this is in concept only, as moved by the committee. So again, on this item, I would entertain a motion to approve. Moved and seconded. Without objection, we'll record 5-0 on both sides. Page 20, same thing. Unless there is any discussion by committee members, I would entertain. Mr. Dutton moves. I have a second. Then seconded. Again, without objection. Mr. Lowenthal, did you have a comment?
No, just second.
Then without objection, we will record the vote as 5-0 on that item. Moving on to page 21. Again, members, any questions or comments? Then page 21.
Do we know how?
Did the Department of Finance have any comment on any alternative proposals that have been brought forward on this? No.
We understand that there are some proposals under discussion by outside groups. We think our proposal is the one that makes sense relative to getting us ongoing savings and making sense from a policy perspective in this general fund situation.
All right. Then did I have a motion to approve this item?
Yeah.
Been moved by Mr. Nielsen.
No, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nielsen.
I was of the understanding that there were some negotiations or some discussions of an alternative proposal. I don't know how imminent that would be. If it's imminent, I would suggest we put it over. If it's just out there pie in the sky, hollow offering, then I do not think we should.
My understanding is that there's some discussion relative to an alternative proposal, but that at this point in time, the alternative proposal that has been brought forward by some industry groups is a one-time provider fee. Our judgment is that in this general fund situation, we need to look for ongoing savings, and that our proposal is the way to go relative to where those discussions stand.
Mr. Blumenfield.
I'm just figuring this out. How do they find out what the lowest rate is? Is that public information in terms of billing the third-party rate?
In terms of the pharmacy or the department?
In terms of the pharmacy.
This is a requirement on pharmacies relative to how they are to bill the department. We would then have to validate that they have billed us correctly, similar to how we would do in other billings. Anything you'd add, Dan?
But the rates are they public record? No.
Madam Chair, members, my name is Dr. Kevin Grosby. I'm Chief of Pharmacy Policy for the department. This basically redefines the usual and customary for pharmacies. They're currently under the requirement of billing usual and customary, and under the current definition of that is basically the cash price they would charge a customer walking in the door. What this does is tells the pharmacy that their new usual and customary is the lower of either their lowest third-party rate or their lowest cash price. So it's basically redefining something they're already required, and our audits and investigations folks look at usual and customary when they audit the pharmacies.
Mr. Lowenthal, did you have a question or a comment?
No, my comment was that since one of our purposes is as much transparency as possible, it would be helpful for people who are watching this just to give the item, instead of item number 10, just tell them what the name of what we're doing. Because I don't think people know what we're voting on out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was doing that earlier, and then I kind of dropped it in the interest of moving things forward. We're dealing with pharmacy providers and upper billing limitation for Medi-Cal program. All right, so also in the interest of transparency, if there are things that are being discussed and negotiated that could come to this committee as alternatives, I think they need to come to us before we have the item for discussion. So, I mean, I like hearing that there might be an alternative out there that we should look at, but we're under a time limit here, and so I'm not talking to you folks so much as folks outside there. If there's going to be a viable alternative, we need to have it in our hands before we discuss it in committee. Okay, so did we take a motion on this? All right, we have a motion and a second. Without objection, we'll record the vote as 5050, approving this item.
Madam Chair?
We'll be on.
Ms. Walters?
We're laying off on the...
Oh, I'm sorry.
You made the motion, sorry. No, we're off.
Then did we have a motion? I think that was the last item. You wanted to keep it open?
Yes, keep it open.
I'm not saying no. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for it. I just don't want
All right.
You want to keep it open?
It's a savings of 22.5.
So do I have a motion to approve this or not? I have a motion.
Moved.
And a second. Then we'll record the vote as 3232. All right. Then,
I think they want 3-0.
I'm sorry. 3-0, you're off. All right.
We have some other stuff we want to check.
3030.
So they're off.
Yeah. All right. Page 22. Pharmacy providers changes to estimated acquisition costs. This is another one where I think the proposal is still evolving, if I'm not mistaken. The LAO's office and Department of Finance.
It's a reduction. I think it would help if we also said the revised is a reduction of $36,900,000, just so people know what we're talking.
You want me to? How much more should I read?
Just that, just that, and the
All right,
amount.
a reduction of $36.9 million.
That's it.
I'm not aware of any alternatives or discussions regarding other proposals on this item.
All right, LAO.
We believe that the savings are achievable, and we think that this is an option that the legislature should consider. We are unaware of any other alternative proposals.
All right. Mr. Cheney has moved approval. Do I have a second?
No, but I have a comment of what we're going to do.
And Mr. Nielsen, did you have you look like...
Just an
Then
observation.
we'll go with Walters and then Nielsen.
We're going to lay off the saving on the MAIC, but we're going to support the AWP and FUL.
What's the MAIC?
It's
that different? How do these distinguish themselves? Maybe finance.
It's the same as the previous page that we laid off on, which is part of the alternative proposal.
So you need a separate vote on the MAIC portion of this item and the AWP portion of the item?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Nielsen?
Just an observation, these two items, that if there's an alternative proposal of some magnitude, I think it would be worthy of reconsidering based on the magnitude of it. If it's just kind of fudging around the edges, I don't think we should waste our time. We should move ahead expeditiously. But if it is of some moment, I would certainly suggest that LAO and Finance analyze it and bring it to our attention.
We could substitute it if it worked out.
I thought what I heard was there wasn't one.
Not on this one.
On the previous item, there might be. And if there is, then yes, it should be brought back. But again, I would encourage everybody involved in whatever negotiations are going on to get it to the committee on a timely basis. So I'll have to ask the maker of the motion if she would divide it up into two. All right, then The first motion being to approve
Can
the...
we have finance explain the difference between the two and why?
The difference is in the three different pieces. The federal upper limit are prices that the federal government requires states to, upper limit prices that require the states to not exceed. Right. So that would happen naturally. The average wholesale price is a pricing factor the department uses in reimbursing pharmacies also for primarily single-source drugs. That, again, is based on a lawsuit and will reduce the average wholesale price submitted to the department. And based on our formula and statute, that also will happen without any additional actions. So those two actions are just savings that would happen naturally.
The AWP and
AWP and the federal upper limit.
The federal upper limit.
The MAIC.
Well, we have to score the savings.
The maximum allowable ingredient cost is a state set maximum allowable as opposed to the federal upper limit. That is proposed changes to the current statute to allow the department to use a different pricing factor. The reason is because due to actions in federal court and then Congress, the ability to use another pricing factor called average manufacturer price was taken away from the department. The department will not likely have access to that information until after October, if at all, and therefore the department is seeking a different pricing factor to use.
So what's the objection to doing that?
Well, our understanding is that the alternative proposal by the pharmacist is going to cover the savings, the MAIC savings. And so we laid off on that last, on
If
the
that
last
other deal
one.
comes
So we
together.
want to see that, right.
All right, so I move adoption of items 2 and 3 as outlined on the left side of the, recognizing the AWP. Well, no, because they want to separate the vote is the problem. So items 2 and 3, 5050, is that what I'm hearing? Mr. Nilo?
Yeah. 5050.
5050, and now I'll move item 1.
And that would be 3030. All right?
There we go.
Then we can move on to page 23. Freeze reimbursement rate for long-term care facilities, non-AB 1629 and AB 1629. Of course, for a savings of $75.756 million. Question of the LAO, how much federal dollars are we turning away for this?
We would be turning away roughly 75 million general fund with the 50-50 federal match. With the greater match, we would be turning away more federal funding.
And are there, did the LAO's office have alternatives for us to consider?
In our May proposals, we put out an alternative regarding the AB 1629 facilities, the skilled nursing facilities, for a rate cap of 4.5%, and we believe that this would produce 9.2 million general fund savings in the budget year, and then in 2010-11 that would grow to 22.2 million general fund in savings.
How does it work?
It would be because of the nursing homes, the rates would grow at a slower pace. And that 9.2 million in the budget year takes into account the greater general fund split. So in 2010-11, we would lose the greater federal funds match, and therefore we would receive higher general fund savings.
So do you have a total on how much we would actually save or how much we would actually not lose, maybe is a better way of asking the question, in terms of general fund state dollars and federal funds that we would not be turning away if we adopted the LAO proposal? What I'm trying to do is compare apples and apples. Mm-hmm. If we took the governor's the May revised proposal and turned away 75 point some million dollars in federal money and cut $75.7 million in state general funds, $150 million, right? that we lose. So what I'm trying to figure out is how much do we lose if we took the LAO recommendation?
I can get back to you on that number.
All right, because I don't think it's as simple as adding up
Right.
the 9.2 and the 22.2 and then doubling it from what you just said.
No, we can't.
Okay.
It's not. I believe that in the budget year, it's roughly 22 million total funds. But I can get back to you on the exact number.
Okay.
Let me try something.
Ms. Duchesne?
Well, I guess here's the problem, and maybe it's partly because this description is a little confusing, because this calls it a COLA, and this was a more complicated deal than it wasn't a COLA. It has to do with the nursing homes doing their fees and bringing down the Medicaid money, and then there was sort of an agreement that they would continue to get some costs over time. Now, I personally am not, as much as I know that was that thing, I don't know how you suspend that, because it's really not a COLA. It's a little misleading, it seems to me, to call it a COLA. But I get it. It is a cost of doing business or whatever that was tied to that whole deal. So the tricky part here is not undoing the deal and at the same time collecting savings. Maybe it's suspending it for some period of time, or the next item has some potential revenues generated through trailer bill also that affects the same statute. So I'm not quite sure how you do this. I'm interested in the maximum savings. I do think, unfortunately, for the nursing homes, that we got to do some of this cut as much as possible in order to have some money available to do in-home supportive services and other things. So there's going to have to be a balance here, and I don't think their fees are drawing down as much money as these increases have been costing, however that works. I mean, they're not drawing down as much as what this is costing. So I don't know how to do it right, and that's the only thing I'm concerned about.
All right, what's the committee's pleasure? The recommendation is to hold, open, or approve. All right, so it sounds like we need more information before we can...
I would argue to hold it over. It seems like there may be some reconciliation with the LAO and the I'm somewhat sensitive to the keeping of good faith with the industry's fees, but it seems like there may be a way to reconcile this.
Well,
Am I wrong?
There are two proposals, and it's a question in some ways of what's the level of general fund savings that you want to achieve here. Basically, the first proposal that LAO and we're in agreement on has to do with expanding the base on which the quality assurance fee is assessed. Currently, it excludes
But that flies
some
in the face
reimbursements.
of the proposal, the agreement before, does it not?
The AB 1629 both contained a cap on the rate of growth that was to be funded at a 5% cap. It also excluded certain revenues from the quality assurance fee that was included in that, that was established by that legislation. This would modify the AB 1629 agreement in two ways. One is by broadening and changing the base, and then the second is by reducing the rate of growth that is allowed. Under our proposal, we would not be providing growth. Under the LAO proposal, there would be a lower cap than the one that was established by AB 1629. And generally, it's a function of what's the level of general fund savings that you want to achieve and the duration for achieving those savings. There are two different approaches, and both affect this issue of what's the overall cap in terms of how much can costs rise from year to year, and what's the amount of cost increases that AB 1629 reimburses.
Which would give us the greatest breaks in the long run? I gather that would be one of my questions.
Our proposal is a greater level of savings in the long run because you're getting the lower cap as well as the higher fee revenues. So our proposal has a greater level of savings. The LAO proposal, I think, is preferred by the industry because in their perspective they supported a fee in association with rate increases, and they see our proposal as not granting them the rate increases that they supported a fee for.
I think there's some value in keeping a little bit of good faith, although these are very dire times. Could we put the item over?
Yeah, just on this page. But we need to get close to this savings number. I don't think $9 million doesn't cut it versus 75, okay? So we can take the action on the other page and try to draw that money in, but the issue here, I think, I'm prepared to suspend it. I was just concerned how we get there, or what, I think 4.5 isn't enough difference from 5. I mean, however we suspend it, maybe there is some other number that's fair.
And there have been different proposals in the past. There have been proposals of 5%, 4.5%, CPI, and a variety of different ranges between 0 and 5 that you can look to both in the short term and the long term in terms of a rate to go. It's really more of a policy call.
Oh, so there isn't a kind of a statutory rate?
5% is the current statutory cap. There have been, we've proposed in the past, for example, a 4.5% cap. There's also been proposals in the past to go to a CPI type of cap on the rate of growth.
But let's
There's
just
different
say,
places
okay,
to
let's
go.
just say the 5% is the cap. That doesn't mean we have to fund it at 5%. But you're actually talking about changing the statute, or are you just talking about lowering the amount that we fund?
We'd be lowering the rate of growth that is provided. The current cap is a
you wanna lower
5%
the
cap.
cap.
Yes, we're basically not providing a cost of living adjustment. The current cap's 5%. The LAO alternative is 4.5%.
But you're
cap.
suspending it forever, or I mean, you're removing it? I mean, that would be bad faith, I think. Or are you suspending it for 2 years and...
We're suspending this year's adjustment in the future, which is not to say next year there would be another adjustment that would come. But this adjustment, it's similar to an SSI.
So you're suspending the adjustment, though, not the statute and the cap for the future?
We'd be suspending this adjustment going forward.
That there'd be no adjustment this year? It's too confusing.
Okay. LAO.
I just want to say that under the AB 1629 methodology, every facility gets its own rate increase up to a certain amount. So the most they can receive is 5%, but they could maybe they could be getting a 2%.
So we could cap it in other words, we could cap it at 2% for the next 2 years, and then, or something. All right.
Okay, I've heard a desire, at least on the part of one committee member, to hold the item open. All right. Without objection, then, we'll hold that open. The next issue is page 24, expand quality assurance fee of AB 1629 nursing homes to include Medicare revenues. Part of this, at least part of this discussion was wrapped up in the previous item. Is there more discussion on this one? All right, I have a motion to adopt. Do I have a second? Second. Without objection, we'll record a 5-0 vote on item 4260 on page 24. And we'll move on to page 25.
So much for
LAO, would you start us out with some comments on this item, please? This is eliminate certain state-only programs.
This proposal would eliminate certain state-only programs, including ancillary health services provided in institutions for mental disease, breast and cervical cancer treatment for certain populations, some non-emergency services, including some other breast and cervical cancer treatment and postpartum care, and the dialysis program and IV and non-digestive nutrition. Overall, the savings that could be achieved would be $34.4 million general fund. However, of the savings, $14.2 million is for the Institute for Mental Diseases ancillary services. Under current law, these are services that the counties are responsible for. We cannot break them out in the payments that we currently pay to the counties. So at the end of the year, we reconcile and make payments back to the federal government for any federal funds that have been spent. And it is up to the counties to repay us to repay the Department of Mental Health for these funds. And the Department of Healthcare Services has continued to budget the repayment in their budget. However, they are not obligated to, and they should not be responsible for the repayment to the federal government, as this is a county responsibility.
So are you recommending that we adopt the proposal on item number 1, which is payment for ancillary health services provided in institutions for mental disease?
We are recommending that the legislature adopt those savings, and the other savings are achievable. They are state-only programs that do not put our ARA support at risk. However, we believe that the legislature should consider what it is that they're doing, and it is an option.
Yeah, they are achievable, but these are the programs that people will die if they don't have, such as dialysis. Mr. De Leon and then Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you much, Madam Chair. On that note, I wanted to throw this out to LAO and DOF. So this cost scored savings at $34 million here. The points that we have here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I want to be very clear about this. These are the programs, if in fact we eliminate them, is this part of the programs that people will die if we eliminate this program?
Other than the first proposal, there is the potential that people will die. However, counties could choose to pick up some of these services.
But that potential is real, and obviously that's contingent on the county themselves, if in fact they choose to do so. So if we do eliminate, again, the governor's proposal 2, 3, 4, and 5, people will die.
Exactly what I was going to say. I like
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if anyone else wants help, please come on in. You know, these are real cuts.
I would like to say that the LAO did not put forth this proposal. This is an administration
No, I'm not
proposal.
trying to put it on you. I just want you to be very clear about that right there.
These are really difficult reductions. These are programs that we've protected up until this point, and we've not proposed for reductions. It is a general fund option available in this difficult time. There are county services. Some of these individuals would also remain eligible for Medi-Cal, albeit with a really high share cost. It's a difficult reduction in difficult times with limited general fund choices.
Well, Madam Chair, let me just conclude with this following. This is something that we have to seriously look at, and this is something that I think we just have to flat out reject. This is not even a question that you hold over.
Mr. Blumenfield?
My questions were along the same line, but I just view this as a bright red moral line that we cannot cross in terms of items 2 through 5. And we need to be real careful when we're saying that we're just going to assume that people are going to be taken up by the county when you talk about these extra costs that are going to be there, and it's something I'm just very worried about. But
Mr. Dutton?
Yeah, I agree these are all tough choices, and it certainly can create some issues. But, you know, I think also, too, as electeds, we got to remember something, too, that after all these reductions that are made to various programs and so forth, there's still a tremendous amount of health and human service programs that are going to be available. As a matter of fact, I had staff take a look at it, and we looked at there's about $70 billion worth of health and human services programs that are still going to be available between state and federal dollars and programs and so forth. So I really want to, I don't think everybody should try to, these are serious situations. There may be some access issues and things like that, but it's not that it's to say people are going to die. I mean, I could die in a car crash leaving the Capitol today, and I don't think that's what we should be, getting people fearful of, because there are other programs that are going to be available. So I reluctantly would support the governor's recommendation. I'll leave it up to the chair.
Mr. Cheney?
I guess I'm okay with, I'd move the adoption of the number 1 proposal, but
With a saving of $14 million.
which is $14 million, in the savings, general fund, so total of about 30 or so. But the other ones, I have trouble. I appreciate Senator Dutton's point, but I'm not sure the access is the question. These are programs that target populations who I'm not sure are eligible always for the others. If they need this dialysis program, it's a small number of folks, but they're not, by definition, the reason it's a state-only program is because they weren't eligible for Medi-Cal.
There are different populations that fall into different categories. The population under number 4 and 5, for example, are populations that don't qualify for Medi-Cal based on their income and assets. So they would qualify with a share of cost, but it likely would be a high share of cost. Breast and cervical cancer treatment is a fairly recent program that was done following the higher matching funds being made available to the federal government. And that program, generally the population that we're looking at here is not population that's otherwise Medi-Cal eligible. So different populations, different categories. Some would qualify with a share cost, others would not.
So I think we have a motion to adopt number 1 and reject items 2 through 5.
You want to make those 2 separate motions? Because adopt number 1.
Okay.
But you're going to close
Yeah.
the other ones?
Yeah, we're going to close the other.
We were going to.
Well, my preference is to close them,
Okay, well then,
but we can
Take two separate
number one
votes.
on-
take two
Yeah.
separate motions.
Okay, so we'll make the motion
on
is
number 1.
on number 1 to adopt. Do I have a second? Have a second. Without objection, the vote will be recorded as 5050 on number 1. Then on 2 through 5, the motion is to reject. Yes, Mr. Nielsen.
I'm struggling with this just a bit. Is there any way to identify the most at risk of this universe, though? I mean, dialysis is pretty definitive, but are there any ways to break that so you had at least a floor that would ensure the highest degree of likelihood you would not be subjecting someone to something terminal? Is there any way to do that, to break it out in this universe of people? Is it impossible, I guess?
I think for the dialysis and the nutrition services is a fairly small population. Nutrition services, we're talking about 5 people a month generally. So they tend to be, the greatest level of savings comes from the breast and cervical cancer treatment program, which again is a fairly recent program expansion. 4 and 5, it tends to be pretty small populations. And so it's
Okay.
5 people statewide
Understood.
per month.
All right, we have a motion. What's your pleasure as far as the recording of the vote?
Aye.
3-0 or 3-2?
No,
3-2 on the.
3-2 and 3-2. All right. Let's move on to page 26. Reduce reimbursements paid for 8 family planning service codes. This, I believe, LAO, this is the one where we get the $9 federal funds to every dollar that the state puts in. Is that right?
This is a proposal that would roll back a rate increase that was provided by SB 94 Kuehl bill that increased the rate for comprehensive planning services. These are 8 procedure codes. For about 89% of the family pack costs, we get a 90% federal match. 10% we get this enhanced FMAP that's been recently provided, and about 1% of the costs we get no federal match.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Just a comment on this one. I mean, we're talking about, well, first, we're talking about $43 million of federal funds. Is that about that?
Yes, $43 million.
$43 million in terms of that, what would be?
And that's at the 50-50 rate.
Yeah. Is there any other
That's not
program that's
enhanced, is
leveraged
it?
this high that you know of?
Excuse me?
Are there any other programs in this whole budget that are leveraged that much, 9 to 1? Or is this the top leveraged program that's out there?
Probably for the benefit side, yes, I believe so.
Okay. I think that's really important to note. And then in terms of a comment, I mean, I have a real hard time with this, and I don't know how you could sit through all of the testimony that we sat through, hearing all these folks with a lot of the problems that people have stem from the fact that they had unwanted pregnancies, that they had children and that they were caring for the children, or that the kids who weren't cared for end up in our jails and our prisons. And to me, it's not only the 9 to 1 federal match, but almost every single one of our costs, or many of our costs, can be related to unwanted pregnancies. And I just think the real cost of this is much greater than 9 to 1. It's probably at least 100 to 1, in my view.
And we are protecting eligibility for the Family Pack program and not making additional reductions. This is, we recognize that we get very large matching funds, but we don't believe we have the general fund available to draw down all the federal funds that we might be able to match in a variety of places here, this one being one of them.
Oh, and Mr. Lowenthal, I forgot to mention it's for a $14.1 million savings. Mr. Blumenfield, would you like to make a motion to reject this? Or, yes, Mr. Dutton.
Just one question. This, in essence, this is just actually rolling it back to the this is just eliminating the rate increase that was given last year, right?
Correct. It's protecting the program. It's the statute was in 2007, so this is rolling back a very recent rate increase that was granted. The program, the eligibility, and all the other requirements are remaining intact.
Okay, thank you.
How long had it been before the prior rate increase? Was that why we did that?
It was a substantial period of time.
Yeah. We can get back to you on there generally were some rate increases in the Medi-Cal program in the early 2000s. I don't believe there had been another substantial rate increase to this program in some time.
LAO's office, remember? Because
That's my recollection. It was early 2000s
Yeah.
when we did the last significant
So it was
rate increases. Yeah.
7-8 years. All right, we have a motion to reject. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. What's your pleasure on recording the vote? 3-2 and 3-2. All right. So we will move on to page 27, adult day health care. LAO, would you like to provide us with a comment and perhaps some alternatives? Excuse me, this proposal is to eliminate adult day health care benefits to Medi-Cal enrollees for a savings of $170.5 million.
There you go. That's a big one.
We would not recommend that the legislature eliminate the adult day health care program. Our analysis shows that less than 20% of the people who use this program, if less than 20% of the people who use this program shift to nursing home care, the savings would be eliminated. And given who uses the program and the acuity of some of the people who do use this program, we believe that there is a high likelihood that less than 20%, that 6,000 people would fall into nursing home care and thus eliminate savings. Initially, the administration had proposed capping the number of days of service at 3 days per week for savings of roughly $18 million general fund. Our office is concerned that if we cap the days of service at 3 days per week, those who use 4 and 5 days of service generally have the highest acuity and need those extra days of service and may become sicker. So we believe that if we target the services to those who most need the care and instead limit the service to only those who would require 3 days or more of care, we would be able to achieve some savings and protect the most vulnerable population. Our proposal would achieve $17.1 million general fund in savings and would also exempt small and rural centers, PACE clients, developmentally disabled clients, and dialysis patients.
So this is one of those issues that looks good on paper, but it really shifts cost to another part of the ledger. Mr. De Leon?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Now, I'm keenly aware this is not your proposal, just like the last one. This is DOF's. So this is a 50-50 match, if I'm correct, from the feds?
It's generally a 50-50 match. For the next 2 years, we are receiving a slightly higher match from the federal government because of ARA. But that is true throughout the Medi-Cal program.
Okay. So the ARA would be one time plus whatever it is separate from the ARA. If we eliminate the program as proposed, how much would we lose from both ARA and other federal sources?
Generally, we would lose $170.5 million in federal funds.
Total.
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 Well, a little bit more because of the
ARA?
of the ARA match.
Because of ARA.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So what LAO has a recommendation on this one. What is that recommendation?
Our recommendation would limit the service to those who require 3 days or more. 3 days
or more. So the
or
most
more.
neediest folks.
To the neediest folks.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Mr. Nielsen?
Is there a fairly high fraud rate in this class?
Yes, there is.
And
for example, a recent study of the ADHD program found that 35% of clients did not meet medical necessity standards, and 35% roughly. 50% of program so there is a fairly high error rate for this program. It has improved modestly, but given the fact that we have an ADHD moratorium in place and the providers that we have in the program are long-term providers, some of the data from those error rate studies is fairly concerning regarding the extent to which the program is being appropriately targeted at eligible consumers versus serving other consumers, the extent to which we're receiving claims for for things that are inappropriate claims, such as mealtime and other such components. So there are concerns around program integrity. There's also been substantial federal concerns about this program, the extent to which they think it's an appropriate optional benefit, whether they think it should be a waiver program, and there's been a lot of work between the state and the federal government regarding what role ADHD plays in the Medi-Cal program.
Well, let's get right to the point of the fraud, though. Are there any concrete proposals that we have that could reduce that some 20% fraud rate? Do we have any hard proposals that we could make as a part of this agreement, where we'd say to accept some of the LAO's proposals instead of the administration's, but reserve some long-term savings through the fraud component?
We have a fraud prevention and program integrity proposal before you in the May revision. That proposal, given the fact that we're proposing elimination of the program, is now being withdrawn. But there are, if the program is retained, we think that there are important things to do from a program integrity standpoint, and we have those proposals before you.
All right.
Mr. Cheney and then Mr. Lowenthal.
Well, I guess this goes to the multiple problem. Their first proposal included new positions to do anti-fraud work and some other cost containments. Their second proposal was to eliminate the program. What she's saying is, since we're now proposing to eliminate, finance no longer supports their first proposals, which were things like 3 days and fraud folks. I guess here's the way I've been looking at this, and if there's that much fraud, I'm concerned, but I don't like the notion that I'm just adding positions of auditors to find the fraud. So who is it that decides that somebody's eligible for these hours that you're saying they may not in fact be eligible? Who's making those determinations today?
Currently, this is David Maxwell Jolly, Director of Department of Healthcare Services. Currently, the adult day healthcare facilities provide our field offices with treatment authorization requests, which document on paper the nature of the case, the conditions of the patient.
So the provider themselves, though, is telling you how many hours the person has to serve? No wonder we have a fraud
and the medical
problem.
conditions that justify their admission to the facility.
So in IHSS, for instance, we have in in-home supportive services, we have a county eligibility worker who goes to your house and says, I've looked at how you're living, and I've looked at your condition, and I've looked at your living situation, and you need 2 hours of this and 4 hours of that and 5 hours of the whatever. In this one, we don't have somebody that makes that kind of determination, a doctor, a social worker, somebody?
We do not. When the program was initially established, we did on-site TAR reviews.
No wonder we have a problem.
As the program has grown substantially, we just don't have the staff to go out and do on-site reviews. The staff that we had proposed as part of the anti-fraud initiative would have actually done large-scale sweeps throughout the whole industry, identify the facilities most greatly at risk for having people not really needing the care, and those particular facilities would be put on a regime of on-site reviews.
Here's, I guess, what I'm looking for in this whole discussion, because I think we have to leave this open. I don't think we're there yet. But I think, the TAR process is one, but without real independent verification, I don't know how to think about that. But it seems to me, members, all of us, are going to have to figure out how we deal with in-home supportive services, this one, caregiver resources, MSSP. We have all of these different programs that seem to serve more or less the same population in some fashion. And it just seems like we ought to decide what that safety net is. And I don't know whether the same folks who get in-home supportive services also get adult day health services and caregiver resources and MSSP. And in other words, I don't know how to untangle that and say there are certain people who, at least from the testimony we got, for whom this is the important program, but they may not need the others. Or I don't know how to construct a safety net that has all the pieces without the cost, without as much cost. So, I'm open to figuring out how to reduce these, but I don't know how to, it seems like the reduction may have to be in combination, and I don't know how to think about who needs this, and if that's the problem, then maybe we need somebody that's evaluating, and making these decisions about how many hours you need. If we no longer have field folks, I'd like to cut the fraud, but I'm really not interested in hiring new people to do that. I'm trying to figure out how to do it inherently to the program, but I don't know how to think about that. So I'd appreciate it if folks go off and kind of think about some of those elements. How do you match one of these people? And if the adult day services for 4 hours a day keeps you from going to nursing home and you don't need in-home supportive services because you have that resource.
And 50%
right?
of
I don't know how
ADHD
to...
50% of ADHD consumers also receive in-home supportive services.
How many?
50%. So there's a great deal of overlap between the populations, as you've noted, that are consumers of multiple services that we provide, be it through the Department of Aging, through the Department of Social Services, or through the Department of Healthcare Services.
Well, we're going to have to figure out how to separate all that and reduce it all as a package in some fashion rather than just trying to eliminate each one separately, I think. But.
Mr. Lowenthal, then Ms.
Yeah.
Walters, then Mr. De Leon.
Yeah. It just seems to me what we're talking about is graduating people from ADHD adult day health care to nursing homes, which I don't consider a graduation in any way because, and so I'm just wondering, the ledge analyst, LAO is saying that if we do this, those, and not just provide the services for the most at risk, that most at-risk population is going to end up in nursing homes. Are you scoring all the nursing homes? Where's the savings? Where is the savings? I see nursing homes so much more expensive, plus a horrible place to place people. Why are we not including that when you're saying, well, if we eliminate ADHD, and especially the most vulnerable, which is what the LAO is saying, is keep those in ADHD, because then they won't go to nursing homes. Are you scoring all the nursing homes?
We are not scoring cost shifts in this proposal. I would note that the LAO said if 20%, not necessarily that there is not an agreed upon level of cost shift associated with these.
So what are you doing? They're saying 20%. What are you saying?
Well, we are not assuming cost shift with this proposal. I think there is a great deal of overlap between the different services that are being provided, and we recognize that there would be some level of cost shift. However, we don't have a number that we think is an appropriate number for us to budget to from a cost shift standpoint.
I think you should, because this is the last step. We're talking about the last place you go to. And if we can keep people out of nursing homes, and it's going to cost us so much more to fund nursing homes, we need that information.
Ms. Walters.
There's been a lot of discussion about federal matching funds, and we know a lot of these programs have federal matching funds. And my question is to the Legislative Analyst's Office and the Department of Finance. And is it possible to close the budget gap without losing some federal funding?
No. From our perspective, no. Again, the Medicaid program, essentially, for every dollar that we spend that is eligible to claim, we would be receiving 60 cents on the dollar from the, in terms of the matches, 60-40 roughly, during this period of time. We just don't have the available general fund to draw down the level of federal funds that may be available to us under current law.
Which brings my point that we're all going to have to understand that we're making cuts and we're going to lose some federal matching funds. So we have to keep that in mind and look at where our priorities are when it comes to balancing this budget.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We're turning away a lot of federal funds. I also think, though, for my purposes at least, I want to know how much that is, because I want to be mindful of what we're doing, not just what the bottom line here is. But without dispute, you're absolutely right. And Mr. De Leon, then Mr. Leno, and then Mr. Dutton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to beat this horse to death, but the overlap issue. Can you go a little into more detail about the overlap issue with regards to IHSS and the daycare adult centers?
50% of adult day health care consumers also receive in-home supportive services. There's also consumers that are served by the in-home supportive services program, by the adult day health centers, as well as the regional centers. So consumers are served through a variety of different systems, and there's a great deal of overlap
Where does that figure come from? The one that you just the overlap. Where does that figure come from?
The 50% of ADHDs from the Department of Healthcare Services and their review of program consumers and the extent to which they're duplicate users.
So, if correct me where I'm wrong. If you use one of the daycare centers during the daytime, how is it that where's the overlap within a 24-hour, 7-day cycle?
We're not saying that they're using both services at the same time. It's just that they're consumers that are using both systems. So, for example, the in-home supportive services program has a total cap of services of 283 hours. That works out to roughly 9 hours a day. We're not saying that they're getting the same service at the same time. It's just that they are users of more than one system.
Okay, my caution is in this one. I know, again, these are painstaking decisions that we're making, but we have to be very intelligent in the way we go about making certain cuts. This is a 50-50 match. The whole issue about fraud and the waste, I know that makes very good copy for the folks over there in the press right now that want to focus on that. But these are real human beings, and these are real lives. These are individuals who are Alzheimer's patients who otherwise would not have any place to go to. I would just ask my colleagues here on the conference committee, let's be a little cautious and circumspect. Let's get a little more information, with regards to this. A 50-50 match, that's a tremendous amount of money to leave on the table with regards to the federal money. And like Mr. Lowenthal just articulated a few minutes ago, this is maybe just one step from going to a nursing home, and I don't know what those costs are at the nursing home, but I can tell you that these folks can't afford the nursing home, so it's going to come out of the state, out of the county, somewhere. So I would just caution my colleagues that we really look at this a little more closer.
Mr. Leno, then Mr. Dutton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask LAO how it is you determine that 20% figure. I don't doubt it. It could be 25, it could be 30. It's a figure. But I just wondered where that came from.
We looked at the cost of the program and the average cost of participation in the program, and then we determined the average cost for a nursing home, and then worked backwards from there. And then from that, we determined that roughly 6,600 people, if 6,600 people shifted to a nursing home, it would eliminate the savings from
right.
elimination.
Thank you. This is a significant amount of money. We're going to have to come back to it, I would imagine, and see if we can't find some, whether it's through the LAO options that they're suggesting. But what I think makes this item different from others that we've been hearing is I've not heard LAO so definitively state that if just a small fraction of those who are using these services are denied, the savings will be wiped out immediately. I haven't really heard that on any other item. So I think we need to proceed cautiously and I would imagine come back to it at some point soon.
Mr. Dutton?
I guess where I'm kind of coming, we got a lot of tough, probably even harder decisions we're going to be looking at, and I'm just curious if anybody here has any other ideas that they're going to be proposing, where we can find the savings. I'd kind of like to know so that I don't have to keep making hard votes. And so, I'd appreciate it if somebody could kind of tell me where you want to go. If we're going to start talking, if what you're going to be getting to is that you got to go raise taxes or something else like that. I started out with the Hastings, which was frankly an easy one to me to cut, but now all of a sudden I'm getting into some really tough stuff, and I just don't know where you're going to find the savings for all the things that people want to not do. None of this is pleasant.
Well, we did $6 million already
but I know, but to look how much more we haven't done, and I don't see any of this stuff getting easy. I mean, this is all going to be tough. It's painstaking. A lot of us have family members that perhaps this applies to. I know I do as well, and I just need to know from my colleagues if they've got some other place that we're going to find savings. I would certainly wish they would kind of tip me off as to where it is, so
guess-
that I can feel better and maybe not have to make.
Well, I don't know
tough
that we've figured that out yet, but I think that's why we're asking finance and LAO and folks to look at this stuff, understanding how these work, understanding there may be overlaps with other programs. It seems to me some of this needs to be treated as a package. The in-home supportive services, a lot of the aging services, this one, the caregiver resources, a lot of those have these overlapping issues. And it seems to me if we can create the savings through and still have a safety net, that's the object. And so what it takes to do that is at least what I'm looking for. It won't be quite this number, but until we get through that and figure out what we think is our baseline of things that we can do to protect folks and reasonably find savings, then we don't know what's missing. Because there's some other ones where we're rejecting governor's increases that will, I mean, at some point, you sort of got to balance them out, but I don't know what they are.
Just share with me where we're going to find the savings, that's all.
Well, and I think this is one of those very problematic ones where the potential cost of accepting this is greater than rejecting it. And I, for one, don't want to make decisions that end up costing us more money, even though Department of Finance might not currently be able to score those costs. Costs are real. And I don't think we should ignore that. So we're going to hold this one open, members, for more information. And one of the things we need to know is what it would end up costing us in the long run. Next item, another simple one. Page 28, restrict Medi-Cal services for newly qualified legal immigrants less than 5 years, and PRUCAL, permanently residing under the color of law individuals, for a savings of $125.5 million. LAO, would you like to open on this item?
We believe that the savings from this are achievable. We believe that this does not put at risk any ARA funding, that we can do this if so desired. Given the state's current fiscal condition, we think that this is an option the legislature can consider to achieve general fund savings.
I guess this is the one we keep asking the federal government to fix their rules. You know, they allow people in. They have made folks lawful immigrants. This is, you know, been frustrating for all the 10 years we've been dealing with it. I don't know whether I'm prepared to separate the food stamps from the SSI piece. I'm reasonably convinced I'm not ready to have all those widows dropped off the rolls on the SSI. And I don't know how to think about the other portion of this, but it is so frustrating that the federal government, you know, I mean, I don't know that we as a state have a value where we're prepared to treat legal immigrants differently, and it shocks my conscience that the federal government does still do that. And I don't know whether they're prepared to start to rethink that in this administration, which would be nice. You know, but at least the characterization of most of the population, certainly on the CAPI program, is, if I recall from the first time when we created this, I mean, who we're talking about here are Vietnamese widows, basically, of folks who served, you know, in the Vietnamese army, and their widows came over here, and they haven't been able to learn English because they're 85 years old, and so they're not citizens, and so they're in this program. I mean, that's, and a lot of the others are refugees from various countries. They're political refugees on the whole. That's why they're PRUCALs. And I just don't even know how to think about doing this elimination. You know, but until we find all the other savings or jam up the feds a little more, I don't know if folks want to leave it open.
Mr. De Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Ms. Duchesne with regards to how draconian this cut would be for that universe of individuals, particularly the example that she just made of those individuals who lost their lives in the Vietnam War and who came over as refugees and who are senior citizens now. who don't speak a word of English and who knows what their educational background is in their own native country. That being said, their skill set is limited to non-existent, and this is their only lifeline. If I'm correct, could you, what is the number, if you have it, the universe of the legal immigrants and the PRUCAL folks? And who exactly are the PRUCAL folks? These are not legal permanent residents, yet they're not undocumented immigrants. Who is this universe, right?
At the moment, the department has said that there's roughly 49,000 newly qualified aliens and 17,000 PRUCALs. And it is our understanding that PRUCALs are non-citizens who, for the most part, the federal government is aware that they are residing here, and it is understood that they will not be deported.
Why?
They're here under, the terminology is people here under color of law. And the federal government gives you a piece of paper that says, you come in every year and they give you a new piece of paper that says you're eligible to continue to stay here. They tend to be refugees on the whole, mostly political refugees, that they haven't quite figured out how to give them an actual regular status because they may not have a citizen relative, but they're not going to deport them back to their country of origin for any number of reasons. And so it's a situation they've created. They are here in lawful status. They are just not what is known as a lawful permanent resident. And so they get treated differently, which is just dumb under both this and some of these other programs. And, you know, I don't know how you separate. I mean, I was referring actually to stuff in social services when I saw this because the number's the same, but the principle's the same. It's how do you treat legal immigrants differently than citizens, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Going back to Mr. De Leon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My concern is this, is that we're creating a second-tier class of citizens, of folks who are not leaving the country. They're not going back to their place of origin. They're going to stay here. And what are the budget ramifications with regards to the health care costs when they have to go to the emergency room center, and who ends up footing the bill for that? I know that this is an issue when it comes to immigrants, and immigrants has always been a very polarizing and polemic issue. And it's quite easy in the political spectrum, in the hierarchy, if you will, to find the scapegoat and that one that will be easily discarded. So I have a hard time on this issue right here, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nilo. Then Ms. Welters.
First of all, there is absolutely nothing polarizing about immigration. It's been the driving force of the growth of this country since it was founded. Now, if you want to talk about illegal immigration, that's another issue. But we're talking specifically about legal immigration, and I think we ought not, for sake of inciting some visceral visceral aspect to the argument, draw some implication that we're talking about something that we're not. So this is not a controversial issue per se, except for if we are frustrated with the way that the federal government manages immigration, legal immigration, and I think all of us can probably agree that the way they both manage it and don't manage it does cause a great deal of frustration. But we ought not to bring that frustration proactively to our front door by providing benefits to that group that are richer than other states provide. We will guarantee that we will be frustrated by it. During testimony last week in one area, there was a gentleman who specifically said that he moved to California because we offered benefits that his home state does not. I don't know if anybody noticed that, but I thought that that was interesting. I did ask, why would that be? And it's because we don't ask. we don't care if people move here to take advantage of a higher level of benefits versus other states. So, and this is a perfect example of that. We can be frustrated, but I'm not sure that we have the right to be frustrated if we're actually going to pay people to come here to frustrate us. So I would challenge the underlying level of benefits that we're allowing in this area, and I would think that the proposal is a reasonable one.
Thank you, Mr. Nilo. Ms. Walters?
I have a couple questions for Department of Finance, and I'm not sure if you can even answer them, but when people come into this country as legal immigrants, do they make some sort of commitment that they are not going to ask for public services for the first 5 years they're in this country or in the state?
I think many of the requirements fall on the sponsor, not necessarily on the immigrant. But I'll double back with some immigration experts and come back. But sponsors, when they sponsor somebody to come into the country, generally have an obligation to provide support. Exactly how that obligation works is sometimes looser than others, but we can get back to you with some specifics.
Well, if you could, because I think that's an important discussion in terms of clarification, because when people do come to this country, and if the sponsors do make some sort of commitment, they should be held to a standard and live up to their commitment. And then the other question I have is, how many other states provide full scope benefits for these groups? Do you happen to know?
We'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, how long have we done this? The information I have is that we've always provided these immigrants with full-scope Medi-Cal services, but I don't know what that means exactly.
There's different parts. The PRU-CALS is a longer term. It's a longer term program. As your agenda notes, the federal welfare reform in 1996 said if you arrived into the country after August 22nd of 1996, if you're not here for a 5-year period, then it'd be ineligible for federal funds. There's been a series of restorations over time that have affected different populations. That policy change affected Medicaid.
Stop right there, though, because that's what I'm trying to get at. We've always had California law and federal law in sync on this, and then in 1996, the federal law changed.
In 1996, when the federal law changed, California created programs to provide services to some of the populations that were made ineligible. If I recall correctly, when the changes were created in state law and CAPI and CFAP, et cetera, initially there were sunsets built in, and there have been different adjustments to different programs over time.
So what was it in 96 that changed?
Federal law changed.
I know that, but what was the driving factor behind that?
Clinton signed it.
Clinton signed it, and I understand that.
Wilson signed the state-only program.
So I guess I'm exploring whether there was some policy reason. Maybe there were political reasons, I get that. But whether there were some policy reasons that changed that California didn't keep up with, or it sounds like no. Okay.
There were changes made at the federal level. California chose to create state-only programs to continue to provide the same level of benefits to some of the populations.
Okay. All right. So this is a challenging issue, it sounds like. I don't know. Members, we can hold open, we can reject, we can accept.
I'll make a motion to accept the governor's recommendation.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. I think it's 2 in favor on each side and 3 against on each side. So shall we hold open, members, or reject?
Hold open.
Okay, the consensus is to hold this item open. Then let's move on to page 29. Potential state transition costs for Medi-Cal Management Information System. My understanding is this is contingency funding on a new contract. If the LAO could comment on this, please.
Sure. The MMIS is the claims processing system used for Medi-Cal. The current contract is going to end June 2010. And typically there are transition costs built to the budget for unforeseen costs that could happen as there is a transition to potentially a new vendor. We would agree with the proposal here. Due to the budget situation, this probably isn't the best time to be budgeting for unknown contingency costs. If the costs are needed, they could be built in or found somewhere. We're saying take it out.
You
Take it out.
Right, take it out. All right.
This program processes billions of dollars in claims. There are new prompt payment requirements that have substantially increased the stakes associated with any problems relative to the processing of such claims, because for any day that we're not in compliance with prompt payment requirements that have now been expanded to substantial provider categories, we would lose our ability to be able to claim federal funds. We are out to bid. We want to have a competitive bid process, and if the incumbent vendor does not win in that bid process, we're going to need dollars to be able to make the transition work without putting billions in federal funds at risk.
Mr. Cheney?
You just got your reorganized Office of Information Technology, and they're supposed to be fixing the procurement stuff so we don't have these kind of overruns.
If you, Madam Chairman, David Maxwell Jolly again, they're really, when you're doing a competitive procurement, you are also you're always facing a choice, usually facing a choice between whether to continue with an incumbent or whether to find a new vendor. In the case that you have a new vendor, you have to have an overlap period, because you have to make sure that the new vendor learns how to operate that system
Well, you need to factor that into the bid and figure out whether it's worth it or not. And you need that new reorganized Office of Information Technology that's supposed to be figuring this out and making it cheaper to do it right.
In the case that the bid is won by the incumbent, one can avoid those costs. In the case that it's not won by the incumbent, you have a mandatory overlap. The risks are unacceptable if you don't have that overlap.
One should account for those costs in the determination of who wins the bid, one would think.
Okay. Mr. Leno.
Existing contract is good through
June 30th, 2010.
next year.
Yeah.
Next year. I appreciate the reminder that we'll lose some federal funds, but that's not the first time we've heard this. I would move that we delete this funding.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. 5050 on both sides. All right, we can move on to page 30. This item is trailer bill language for mental health services supplemental payments program. There's no dollar amount attached to this. My understanding is that there's currently a stakeholders process on this item, I believe, or discussions happening. So let's
one less bed.
Hold it open and move on to page 31.
One less nursing home bed.
31, 32, and 33 are trailer bill issues that we don't have any language for, so unless members object, I would move past those. Mr. Cheney.
I guess I'm trying to figure out, do we need policy committees on some of this stuff? Some of this stuff is, what are you trying to do here, Finance?
Is this item 31?
31, 32, and 33. Might as well talk. They're all standalone trailer bills.
Do we have time?
For which we have no language.
Right, there's that problem, too.
I agree with Chair. I think we ought to move past them until we finally get the language.
Well, I just want to hear from them what it is so they can figure out how they're going to draft them if they're going to draft them.
And I believe we have provided language on most of these items. We can speak to each one of the issues.
Okay, just talk us about the issues briefly for us so we can understand what it is you're going back and trying to do here. Because I think we just got it like today or something, if we did.
Item 31 enables the state to recover its Medi-Cal costs upon the death of an individual receiving services while under a trust. And that's consistent with federal law, which encourages us to recover our costs to the extent possible. Item 32.
Is there any real savings? I mean, I guess what my concern about these is standalone trailer bills that don't have any dollars attached to them, whether we ought to be sending these to policy committee.
There's different pieces on different issues. For example, on issue 31, it's more of a cost avoidance issue. Historically, we have had this system where people enter into where we say we provide services, but we can recover from the trust. There's been some litigation, again, part of the increase in litigation that we're experiencing, where there's been a determination that we need to change our existing system in order to be able to continue to recover from those trusts for costs that the state pays for.
So why is this a trailer bill and not a regular bill?
Because it's a cost avoidance fiscal issue.
we are losing recoveries we'd otherwise would have to get. We'd have to score recoveries lower if we do not get this fixed.
But how long have we known about this? In this house at least, in our house, Judiciary Committee's going to have to look at this. This is not something you just do on the fly in trailer bill. I mean, you can propose it, y'all ought to work on it, but from a policy perspective, you're doing some stuff, you're messing with litigation. I mean, it's just a hard one for us to just sit here and make a decision and see that it works. So it's a caution on trying to draft your trailer bill language. All right.
Okay, so with that caution, let's go on to page 32, standalone trailer bill issue, in-home supportive services plus.
Okay, this is one where we currently operate under an 1115 waiver, and the federal government no longer is going to permit us to do that, so this would technically convert it to a new waiver that the federal government is looking favorably upon.
All right, page 33, standalone trailer bill issue, technical cleanup for safety net care pool, 10% reduction.
Right, and this is just technical cleanup to a policy enacted in the early budget for associated with the safety net care pool.
So on item number 31, which is the one that Mr. Cheney raised the concerns about, what I would suggest, since we've just received the trailer bill language, our staffs and everybody take a look at it, and then we'll make a determination on this committee whether or not we need to refer it to policy committee. Pages 34, 35, 36, 37, and 38, my understanding is that these items will conform to other actions that we take. So if there's no objection, I would suggest skipping to page 39. Page 39 is a technical adjustment to the budget which would accept the federal ARA funds. I doubt anybody has any objection. It conforms as well. I think we can approve this one, actually. Page 39. It's accepting it will change? Okay. All right, then we can move on from that. Pages 40 and 41 is another vote-only calendar. And I'd ask if there are any items that need to be removed from that. Seeing none, then we will deem that approved 5050. 40 and 41, update the California Children's Services Program, update the Child Health Disability Prevention Program, and update the Genetically Handicapped Persons Program. And I understand Mr. De Leon has a question. Going back to 39, you need to turn on your... No, we took no action on item 39. It's conforming to other actions we will take. All right, so pages 40 and 41, seeing no objection, then those will pass out on a 5050 vote. All right, members, that's as far as we in the Assembly have briefed, so we will begin again tomorrow on page 42. Additional savings in the GHPP by accelerating, which is an LAO proposal. So tomorrow morning we are scheduled to commence at 10 a.m. In this room. Anything else by any members? All right, then we are adjourned for the day.